party is younger than you," she stammered, "and their seniority, or perhaps their status, isn't as high as yours." Well, if he only considered the older, more senior women he knew as of now, Shen Qingqiu had only met a handful of elderly female nuns from Tianyi Temple a couple of times, and they really weren't to his taste. By his guess, even if you took into account the entire cultivation world, there wouldn't be many women who were both older and senior to him. Thus, Madame Mayne's 2 points were each incredibly rational, to the point that they were pretty much garbage. "Your first meeting was unhappy, and there might even have been loathing involved," said Madame Maying. "But after a critical moment, that all began to change, and thoroughly so." Now, this criterion seemed meaningful, and Shen Qingqiu's heart couldn't help but flip. Liu Qingge unconsciously turned toward them again. This time, Shen Qingqiu didn't bother teasing him and simply listened closely to the explanation. Madame Maying raised an eyebrow. "The two of you are often together. Ah, you have both saved each other's lives." Upon hearing this, Shen Qingqiu was again confused. Why did it feel like not a single woman in his vicinity seemed to qualify? Ning Yingying, Liu Mingyan, no need to wonder if it was them. They were in Luo Binghe's harem. Cross them out. Qi Qingqi? She was indeed slightly junior to him, and their first meeting, he'd long forgotten about how it went. Often together wasn't quite right, though. Perhaps he at times dared to think about going to Xuansu Peak so they could be, quote, often together. But while he had the wicked intentions, he lacked the courage required to follow through, and he could never commit an act as depraved as stalking. In the end, he couldn't imagine any romance between himself and Qi Qingqi. "Is there more?" Liu Qingge suddenly asked. Shen Qingqiu startled. Only then did he realize that Liu Qingge was no longer listening in secret. He'd moved over to face them completely. Since when had Great Master Liu had so much interest in gossip? "Ah, your fated person has very little interest in others," Madame Maying went on. "But once they find someone, their devotion is absolute." Liu Qingge thought for a while, his expression solemn. Then he asked, "What about appearance-wise?" Shen Qingqiu stared at him, speechless. "Even I haven't asked that. Why are you asking? And you're even getting to the important bits straight on." "Oh my God, a first-class beauty, peerless among humans," Madame Maying said with certainty. Uncharacteristically, Liu Qingge pressed on in hot pursuit. "What about spiritual energy? Talent?" "Outstanding talent, incredible spiritual energy, and of course, illustrious status and noble blood." Liu Qingge seemed to be shaking his head in disbelief. You said that him and this person, they often together?" Madame Maying nodded. "Perhaps they may endure short periods of separation, but they quickly reunite, and each time the other party takes the initiative to chase him." The corner of Liu Qingge's eyes kept twitching, then he would violently suppress it, like something had greatly disturbed him. Or perhaps it would have been more correct to say that he'd stepped on a great big landmine. Then Madame Maying spoke a final line, which dealt him a fatal blow. "Ah, I'm very jealous," she said to Shen Qingqiu. "Do you know, mortal master, this person is deeply in love with you." Liu Qingge stiffly swiveled his head toward Shen Qingqiu. He wore a complicated expression that was impossible to describe. It was clearly neither joy nor anger, yet it was intensely tormented. Shen Qingqiu was confused. "Martial brother, what's wrong?" Liu Jingge struggled to speak. "Inaccurate." Liu Jingge jerked his head up and insisted. "Her fortune is inaccurate." "On what grounds do you claim my fortune is inaccurate?" Madame Mayin asked defiantly. Honestly, Shen Qingqiu also thought it was inaccurate. Often at his side, young and beautiful and honorable, even clinging to him, it reeked of some kind of zhongdian reader male sexual fantasy. No, even sexual fantasies don't go that far into blatant Gary Stew land, okay? A dream girl who met all these criteria. There was definitely no one like that in his circles. Even if they were, she'd be a member of Luo Binghe's harem. Ugh! "Nonsense," Liu Jingge said firmly. "Deeply in love? Absolutely not." With her specialty and exclusive ability having been called into question, Madame Mayin became furious. "Huh! You're not his fated partner, so how would you know if it's inaccurate?" "Wait, young Master Huang hasn't even arrived yet, so could you two stop clashing over something so trivial? And the person this matter concerns is me, isn't it?" Liu Jingge had long since run out of patience. The moment Madame Mayin snapped, he exploded, slamming his palm down. The stone table split cleanly in two, and Chen Luan's sword unsheathed itself in answer, unleashing razor-sharp sword glares. Enraged, Madame Mayin clapped. "Everyone, come out!" Wait, why fight now? What was the catalyst? I still don't know what the turning point was. Naturally, everyone ignored Shen Qingqiu's outstretched hand. At the sight of Madame Mayin and her several dozen succubi servants surrounding them, he adjusted his expression and hurriedly steadied himself for battle. Chen Luan's sword wove back and forth with a chaotic flurry of spiritual blasts, after which Madame Mayin whistled shrilly. "Shit! Not so fast! I haven't psychologically prepared myself." At their mistress's whistle, all the succubi servants' clothes exploded off of their bodies. White, white. No matter where he looked, it was all a great sea of nude, white bodies. Though Shen Qingqiu knew that succubi loved playing this trump card, destroying their clothes en masse in a fiendish and frenzied dance, that didn't mean he could witness such a shocking scene firsthand and without the impact. He subconsciously closed his eyes and backed up 2 steps, slamming into Liu Jingge. The cavern reverberated unendingly with the succubi's charming, incessant cries. A normal man would have been mesmerized and thrown down his sword, gladly succumbing to a blissful paradise of tender women's warmth. But Shen Qingqiu was stunned to see that not only did Liu Jingge act like he had seen nothing, he was utterly expressionless as his sword swept in wide arcs, the blade flashing and trailing blood, slaughtering his foes in a frenzy. The nude succubi revealed their true forms and moved on all fours, their sharp nails digging into the mud and stone, spittle dripping from their mouths. They flung themselves at the 2 people they had surrounded, only to be knocked back by spiritual energy. Shen Qingqiu wanted to fight seriously too. Really, he did, but he couldn't bring himself to look at them head on. Even an experienced, well-guarded elder like himself, faced with such a fresh and lively blood of nude bodies, had a hard time maintaining his composure. How could Liu Jingge fight like it was nothing? Madame Mayin's lovely face had gone pale. She hadn't predicted that she would fail to mesmerize them, even with all her subordinates. She picked up her skirts and ran. Shen Qingqiu had originally wanted to give chase, but when he thought about it, their current task was only to rescue the old Huang couple's son and the other captured men who the succubi were keeping as pets. "There's no need to fight anymore," he said to Liu Jingge. There isn't much they can do anyway. It's more important to rescue everyone. Out of the blue, Liu Jingge said, Don't believe her. Shen Qingqiu was baffled. Huh? That thing before. She was just messing around. Don't be so agitated. I never believed her. Great Master Liu's behavior was awfully strange. Shen Qingqiu couldn't help glancing at him. He'd barely done so when Liu Jingge met his eyes and snapped. Don't look at me. The more insistent he became, the more Shen Qingqiu wanted to look at him. Only then did he realize that, whether because of anger or for some other reason, Liu Jingge's face, from the corner of his eyes to his cheeks, was now dusted pink. His always indifferent gaze seemed like a frozen lake that had been shattered into 1,000 fragments, and the fragments now surged about in his eyes. Shen Qingqiu kept staring at him, then suddenly reached over to feel his pulse. As soon as he grasped Liu Jingge's wrist, he realized that Liu Jingge's temperature seemed slightly high. He counted his pulse for a while, then said sternly, Liu Marshal brother, tell me the truth. Have you dual cultivated with someone before? Why are you asking this? Just asking. You know how dual cultivation works, right? Liu Jingge exhaled, then said through gritted teeth, Shen Qingqiu. All right, I'll ask something else. Liu Marshal brother, right now, how do you feel? Could he endure until they got back? Not good, said Liu Jingge. Oh, of course not. Even if he was great Master Liu, being poisoned by the succubi's natural innate mesmerizing fragrance, or in other words, their aphrodisiac, was profoundly not good. Shen Qingqiu sprang to action. Liu Marshal brother, do your best. I have things to do and will be going on ahead. Liu Jingge grabbed the back of his collar. What do you mean, my best? He snapped. What do you mean, things? Shen Qingqiu looked back and jerked in shock. If Liu Jingge's face had only been a soft red a moment ago, like the clouds at sunrise, now it was like the clouds above a fiery blaze, flooded with terrifying crimson as the veins in his neck began to bulge. Don't be rash, he said hurriedly. Liu Marshal brother, calm down. You sit here. I will go free the young masters, then return and find you. Rest easy, I absolutely won't be back for a while, so you can do whatever you want. No one else will know. With that, he turned on his heel and tried to leave, but Liu Jingge clasped his shoulder with a hand that felt more like a fine iron claw. Why are you running? Motherfucker, he's still at it! Liu Marshal brother, Peak Lord, Liu Blood brother. I'm giving you the time and space you need to resolve your problem. Don't tell me you can't even take this kind of hint. Have you lived all your years doing nothing? Did your core consume your brain? Even if I stayed, I would be useless, said Shen Qingqiu. Liu Jingge laughed coldly. Let me beat you up. Help me vent. That'll be plenty useful. This wasn't a problem that beating him up would solve. Marshal brother, why are you so irritable? If you go on like this, the succubus poison will take over your mind. Liu Jingge's handsome face was splotched with red and white. It seemed like he'd been worked up into true distress, but he had no idea what to do with it. He clung helplessly to Shen Qingqiu, simply unwilling to let go. At the sight of him being so pitiful, Shen Qingqiu couldn't help but think of how Baizha and Peak was a gang of thugs who knew only violence, and about how everyone there was obsessed with cultivating and fighting. Perhaps Liu Jingge, who'd grown up with such traditions, really was mentally defiant with regard to this sort of thing and didn't even know how to jerk off. A deep pang of sympathy struck him. When it came to coaxing others, Shen Qingqiu was an expert. Unfazed, he said, "Little Master Brother, come. Do you remember how we first met?" As was to be expected, the original novel had never explained in detail how these two cannon fodder characters had become nemesis. Shen Qingqiu was only rambling as he tried to distract him. Normally, you could never have so easily messed with Liu Jingge, but now he let himself be pulled along, barely managing to keep his focus in his confused daze. As they walked, he grounded out. "I hit you at the 12 Peaks Sword Trials Terrace." Silence. So that's how it was. It takes a good fight to forge a true friendship. Could it be that, at the time, Liu Jingge had found hitting Shen Qingqiu so enjoyable that he had asked for another round moments ago so he could vent? Shen Qingqiu replied, "Oh," and led him deeper into the cave before asking, "Did I manage to hit you back after?" Even while running a high fever, Liu Jingge remembered to let out a conceited humph. "Of course not." "Excellent." Shen Qingqiu placed a hand on his shoulder and patted it. "Then today, no Master Brother, I shall get my due." And then he kicked Liu Jingge into Madame Mayon's rose-petal-filled bathing pool. Water splashed nearly 6 feet up. Even though Shen Qingqiu had the foresight to cover his face with his fan, icy coldness managed to splash all over his head. A soak at this temperature would assuredly cure Liu Jingge. Shen Qingqiu got down on one knee, half kneeling at the poolside, and said gingerly, "Little Master Brother, how are you now? How do you feel?" A long time passed without any response. Ever since Liu Jingge had sunk beneath the surface, not even a string of air bubbles had appeared. "Does he not know how to swim?" Shen Qingqiu wondered. That didn't seem right. Then had he passed out from the fever? Had Shen Qingqiu managed to not kill Liu Jingge back in Lingqi Caves only to drown him here instead? The more he thought about it, the more likely this seemed. Shen Qingqiu hurried closer. "Little Master Brother! Little Master Brother!" Red rose petals covered the entirety of the water's surface. He couldn't see beneath them clearly and could only continue to approach. Suddenly, something seized his ankle and a hand dragged him into the pool. Abruptly submerged and slammed in all directions by the icy churn of water, Shen Qingqiu's face almost turned blue from the cold. With great difficulty, he managed to grab the poolside before turning his head to see Liu Jingge soaking wet and floating behind him with a deadpan expression. There were even a couple of rose petals in his hair. "Little Master Brother, that was wrong of you," said Shen Qingqiu. "I submerged you to remove the mesmerizing fragrance. How could you retaliate like that?" "You asked me how I felt, didn't you?" asked Liu Jingge. "However you feel right now, that's how I felt." His thinking was clear. His counterattack had strength. Seemed like he was fine now.